They never told you this. Some of the everyday habits you consider harmless, maybe even healthy, might be quietly working against you as a senior, chipping away at your strength, your balance, and your independence years before you'd ever notice a real problem. I'm Dr. James Carter, and after more than 2 decades treating older adults, I can tell you the most damaging habits I see aren't dramatic. They're small, socially acceptable things people do every single day without a second thought. And by the time the consequences show up, they've often been building for years. Here's a number that should make you pay attention right now. Research tracking functional decline in adults over 65 has found that those who continue several common but counterproductive habits into their 70s show measurably faster loss of strength, balance, and independence, in some studies losing functional capacity at a rate up to 35% faster than peers who avoid these same patterns. 35%. That's the difference between confidently managing your own home at 80 and needing significant help years earlier than necessary. And much of it comes down to habits you can actually change starting today. And here's the one I want to tease right now, because it always catches people off guard. It's item number 2 on today's list, and it's something most seniors consider a sign of being responsible and cautious. Something family members often actively encourage. And yet, it may be quietly accelerating muscle loss and fall risk more than almost anything else on this list. I'll explain exactly what it is and why the conventional advice around it is backwards when we get there. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something, because I read every single comment on this channel. Every day. Tell me, how old are you right now, and which of these 7 habits do you already suspect might apply to you? I read every comment, and it genuinely shapes what I cover in future videos, so please don't hold back. All right, let's count it down together. 7 to 1, from concerning to absolutely critical. Number 7. Stop assuming rest is always the safest response to soreness or fatigue. Let me tell you about Frank, 74, from a small town outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. Frank came to my office after a mildly sore knee turned into weeks of near-total inactivity. He'd decided the safest thing to do was rest completely until the soreness disappeared entirely. Instead of improving, his knee got stiffer, his overall strength declined noticeably, and by the time I saw him, a minor issue had become a much bigger one. Here's why this matters so specifically for an aging body. Muscle tissue is maintained through a constant cycle of breakdown and rebuilding, and this rebuilding process slows down considerably with prolonged inactivity, particularly after 65. Think of your muscles like a delivery truck route that runs on a regular schedule, dropping off building materials to a construction site every day. Stop the deliveries entirely for even a couple of weeks, and the construction site doesn't just pause, it starts losing ground that took months to build. Research on bed rest and inactivity in older adults has found that even short periods of significantly reduced movement, as little as 10 days, can result in a measurable loss of muscle mass and strength, sometimes described as roughly 5 to 10% of leg strength in that window alone, a loss that takes considerably longer to rebuild than it took to lose. The fix isn't pushing through genuine pain or ignoring a real injury, but rather distinguishing between soreness that benefits from gentle movement and true injury that requires medical evaluation. For general soreness or stiffness, gentle, low-impact movement, walking, stretching, light range of motion exercises tends to promote circulation and healing far more effectively than complete rest. Reserve full rest specifically for situations involving sharp pain, swelling, or clear injury, and consult your physician when you're unsure which category you're in. For synergy, pair gentle movement during recovery with adequate hydration, since proper fluid balance supports circulation to the healing tissue and helps flush out inflammatory byproducts more efficiently than a dehydrated body can manage on its own. Number 6. Stop skipping protein at breakfast because a light morning meal feels healthier. Eleanor, 79, from a suburb of Sacramento, California, had eaten essentially the same breakfast for decades, black coffee and a piece of toast, a habit she considered disciplined and healthy. What she didn't realize is that this pattern was actively working against her aging muscles every single morning. Here's the science behind why this matters so much specifically after 65. Your body becomes progressively more resistant to using dietary protein for muscle maintenance, a phenomenon called anabolic resistance. Think of it like that same delivery truck arriving at the construction site, but now the site barely responds unless a much larger, more concentrated shipment arrives all at once, rather than a small delivery trickling in. Research on protein timing in older adults has found that spreading protein intake too thinly across the day, particularly with minimal protein at breakfast, produces meaningfully less muscle-building response than concentrating a substantial dose, roughly 25 to 30 grams, at each meal, breakfast included. Skipping protein at breakfast means your body spends the first several hours of every day in a mild muscle breakdown state without the raw materials to counteract it, a pattern that compounds meaningfully over months and years when repeated daily. The fix involves restructuring breakfast around a genuine protein source: eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, or a protein smoothie, aiming for that 25 to 30 gram target rather than an afterthought amount. For synergy, pair your protein-rich breakfast with a brief walk or some light resistance movement shortly afterward, since combining available protein with physical activity appears to enhance the muscle-building signal more than either one alone. Number 5. Stop avoiding sunlight out of an overcorrected fear of skin damage. Vincent, 71, from a small community outside Phoenix, Arizona, had become so cautious about sun exposure after a skin cancer scare in his 60s that he'd essentially stopped going outside during daylight hours altogether, covering himself completely even for a quick trip to the mailbox. His caution was understandable, but it came with an unintended cost. Here's why complete sun avoidance creates its own problem specifically for older adults. Vitamin D, which your skin produces in response to sunlight, plays a critical role in calcium absorption for bone strength and appears to influence muscle function directly as well, with deficiency linked in research to increased fall risk and slower muscle recovery. Aging skin also becomes considerably less efficient at producing vitamin D from a given amount of sun exposure compared to younger skin, meaning older adults who avoid sunlight entirely are at meaningfully higher risk of deficiency than younger people with the same avoidance habits. The fix isn't abandoning sun safety, but finding a reasonable middle ground. 10 to 15 minutes of midday sun exposure on your arms and legs, several times weekly, without sunscreen during that brief window, followed by appropriate sun protection if you're staying outside longer. Discuss vitamin D blood testing with your physician if you've been avoiding sun exposure significantly, since supplementation may be appropriate depending on your levels. For synergy, pair your brief sun exposure with a short walk, combining vitamin D synthesis with light cardiovascular activity in a single daily habit rather than treating them as separate tasks. Now, before we get to the final 4 items, I want to pause for the ones I genuinely believe matter most. If you're finding this valuable, please take a moment to hit subscribe and tap the like button. It helps this information reach more seniors who need to hear it, and it costs you nothing. Thank you to everyone who takes that moment. Now back to the countdown. Number 4. Stop wearing slippers or unsupportive shoes around the house all day. Walter, 77, from a farming community in Iowa, wore the same worn, cushioned slippers around his house from morning until bedtime, considering them the most comfortable option available. What Walter didn't realize is that his slippers were quietly undermining his balance every single day. Here's why footwear matters so specifically for aging bodies. The soles of your feet contain pressure sensors that tell your brain, in real time, exactly how your weight is distributed and whether you're beginning to tip in any direction, a sense called proprioception. Think of it as your body's internal GPS system. Soft, unsupportive slippers blunt this signal considerably, essentially adding static to the line between your feet and your brain, at exactly the age when this signal naturally weakens due to nerve changes that become more pronounced after 70. Research on footwear and fall risk in older adults has consistently found that supportive, firm-soled shoes with good tread reduce fall risk meaningfully compared to slippers or loose, cushioned house shoes. The fix is switching to a supportive shoe with a firm sole and good grip for wearing around the house, reserving soft slippers for brief moments only, like getting up briefly at night. Look for a wide toe box, consistent heel height, and good tread on the sole. For synergy, pair supportive footwear with a simple morning habit, standing barefoot on a folded towel for 2 minutes, gently rocking side to side, which wakes up those foot sensors before you put shoes on for the day. Number 2, and this is the one I promised you at the very beginning. Stop resting excessively to be safe instead of staying appropriately active. I know this sounds similar to number 7, but this is a distinctly different and, in my experience, far more damaging pattern. This isn't about responding to a specific injury. It's about a general, ongoing lifestyle shift many seniors make deliberately, often at the encouragement of well-meaning family members, toward significantly reduced activity simply because they've reached a certain age, not because of any specific medical issue. Dorothy, 76, from a quiet town outside Portland, Oregon, had been gently but persistently encouraged by her children to take it easy after she turned 75, to skip the gardening, avoid the stairs when possible, and generally conserve her energy. Dorothy, wanting to reassure her worried children, complied, gradually reducing her activity far below what her body actually needed or could handle. Within a year, tasks that used to be effortless had become genuinely difficult. Here's why this particular habit is so much more damaging than most people realize, and why I've ranked it above nearly everything else on this list. Muscle and functional capacity operate on a genuine use it or lose it principle, well documented in aging muscle physiology. Deliberately reducing activity below what your body is actually capable of doesn't preserve your remaining capacity for later. It accelerates the exact decline everyone is trying to prevent. Research on activity restriction in healthy older adults has found that unnecessary reduction in daily activity, separate from any actual medical necessity, correlates with meaningfully faster loss of strength, balance, and independence compared to those who maintain their previous activity levels as closely as safely possible. Here's the deeper reason this backfires so specifically after 70. Excessive caution and reduced activity create a genuine paradox. The less you move, the weaker and less stable you become, which then makes movement feel riskier and more difficult, which leads to even further reduction in activity, a downward spiral researchers sometimes describe as a disability cascade. Think of it like a bridge that gets less maintenance traffic over time. Workers assume it's fragile, so they route around it. But the lack of use and maintenance is precisely what causes it to deteriorate faster than if it had continued being used and monitored regularly. The fix requires a genuine mindset shift, one I recognize can be difficult, especially if family members are actively encouraging caution out of love and concern. Appropriate caution means avoiding specific, identifiable risks, an icy sidewalk, an unstable ladder, not broadly reducing your overall activity level simply because of your age. Continue climbing your own stairs, continue gardening, continue tasks you're physically capable of safely managing, and involve a physician or physical therapist in identifying genuinely necessary modifications rather than assuming broad restriction is automatically the safer path. For synergy, pair this mindset shift with the balance and strength practices we've discussed in previous videos, since maintaining genuine activity alongside deliberate strength and balance work compounds the benefit far more than either approach alone. And now, number 1. The single most damaging habit on today's entire list. Stop believing that how you feel today determines what's possible for you going forward. This is less a specific action and more an underlying belief, and I've placed it at number 1 because In my clinical experience, it quietly shapes every other habit on this list. Ruth, 72, from a small coastal town in Oregon, told me plainly that she'd stopped trying new activities or pushing herself in any way because, in her words, "I'm just not who I used to be, and I've made peace with that." I understood the sentiment completely, but I gently pushed back, because this belief, however reasonable it feels, tends to become a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way most people don't realize. Here's why this matters so profoundly for an aging body and mind. Research on what's sometimes called self-efficacy in older adults, meaning your belief in your own capability to improve or maintain function, has found that this belief correlates strongly with actual physical outcomes over time, independent of starting health status. People who believe meaningful improvement is still possible tend to engage more consistently with exercise, nutrition, and social connection, the very habits that produce real improvement, while those who believe decline is fixed and inevitable tend to quietly disengage from exactly the efforts that could help them. Here's the deeper biological reason this belief matters so much. Your body retains a genuine capacity for adaptation at essentially any age, a property researchers describe as maintained plasticity in your muscles, your cardiovascular system, and even your brain. Studies on resistance training and cognitive engagement in adults well into their 80s and 90s have repeatedly found meaningful improvement is still achievable, often within just weeks to months of consistent effort. Think of your body like fertile soil that's simply gone unplanted for a while, not soil that's become permanently barren. The capacity for growth remains, but only if something is actually planted and tended. The practical fix involves consciously challenging this belief in small, deliberate ways, starting today. Identify one thing you've quietly written off as no longer possible for someone my age, and consider whether it's genuinely impossible, or simply something you've stopped attempting. Start small. Work with your physician or physical therapist to establish a safe starting point, and pay attention to genuine progress along the way, since evidence of real improvement tends to be the most powerful antidote to this belief that anything else could offer. For synergy, pair this mindset shift with genuine social connection, sharing your efforts and progress with a friend or family member, since research on behavior change consistently shows that accountability and encouragement from others meaningfully improve follow-through on exactly the kind of sustained effort this shift requires. All of the research I've referenced throughout today's video, along with more detailed breakdowns of each habit and practical technique, is linked in the description below, so you're welcome to look into the specifics yourself and discuss anything relevant here with your own physician. Before you go, I want you to really sit with something. Every habit we've covered today feels small, even reasonable in isolation. Resting a little more, eating a lighter breakfast, staying inside a bit more often, wearing the comfortable slippers instead of real shoes. None of these choices feel dramatic in the moment, and that's precisely why they're so easy to overlook and so easy to quietly accumulate over years. But Frank, Eleanor, Vincent, Walter, Dorothy, and Ruth all discovered the same thing once these patterns were identified and addressed directly. Real, meaningful improvement was still available to them, not because they were exceptional, but because they stopped, quietly and deliberately, doing the things that were working against them. Independence and quality of life in your senior years aren't simply handed to you or taken away by fate. They are shaped day after day by choices that often feel too small to matter, until you look up years later and realize how much they truly did. It is genuinely never too late to change course, no matter which of these 7 habits you recognized in yourself today. If this video gave you something to think about, please subscribe to this channel. I make these because I believe every senior deserves honest, practical information about what's truly still possible for their body and mind. And I'd love to know in the comments, which of these 7 habits surprised you the most, and which one are you going to change first this week? I read every single comment, and I'll see you in the next video.